streaming now. Cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Control Meets Learning seminar. Today is our great honor to have Professor Miroslav Krstic from University of California, San Diego. Professor Miroslav Krstic is a renowned researcher in adaptive control, extremum seeking, nonlinear and stochastic control, control of PDE systems, including turbulent flows, control of delay systems. He has co-authored 16 books and about 400 journal papers on these subjects. Since 2012, he has divided his time between his research and serving as a Senior Associate Vice Chancellor for Research at UC San Diego. Professor Krstic is a recipient of numerous awards, including the Bellman Award, Saim Reed Prize, ASME Oldenburg Medal, and many more. He is a foreign member of Serbian Academy of Sciences and Arts and fellow of IEEE, IFAC, ASME, Saim, AAAS, IET UK, and AIAAF. He currently serves as the editor-in-chief of Systems and Control Letters and area editor in Automatica. So today, Professor Miroslav Krstic will talk about his work on the intersection of adaptive control and learning. If you have any questions during the talk, feel free to put in the chat box. We will have a joint Q&A session at the end of the talk. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Miroslav Krstic.
Thank you, Yun. And first, I'd like to thank you for the introduction and your colleagues and yourself for inviting me to give a talk in this exciting series. And it's also great to see a number of friends in the live audience. I've worked on control and learning for 30 years, and I'm delighted to see the success and the popularity that learning-based control has gained recently. But as the new generation of researchers gets emboldened with this incredible success, the ambition will carry it to those hardest of questions, the questions on which the previous 2 to 3 generations, including mine, have scraped their knuckles. So I want to draw the attention to those hard-learned lessons in this lecture. But don't worry and don't leave yet. I'm not here to spread pessimism. Quite on the contrary, nothing is as exciting as challenges. But it is challenges that I will focus on. So here's the kind of challenges that interest me. So for instance, between problems that are formulated in finite time and infinite time, it's the latter that primarily interests me. Between open loop and feedback design problems, it's the latter that I focus on. Between problems where the plant is unstable and where the plant is unstable, it's the latter. You wouldn't be needing me for problems where the plant is open loop stable. And finally, between learning frameworks that are formulated through simulations, namely offline, and those that are run simultaneously with controlling a system that is possibly open loop unstable, is definitely primarily the latter that whose challenges interest me. So we all are aware of a recent major trend in control and learning, which is that the machine learning methods are beginning to assume feedback law functions and doing so with considerable success. So there is a word of caution that is merited, that challenges will be faced that are associated with learning and control being done simultaneously. Stability question will arise, namely how to survive the training transient for a system that is open loop unstable and is control based on an incorrect model. And the other question is the question about learning. Is learning really needed? Is it even a good idea to wish to fully learn a system? Because fully learning a system comes with a price. No learning takes place without the painful experience through which the plant gets learned. Among the various machine learning related methods, reinforcement learning or adaptive dynamic programming have become the most popular or are the most closely related to the conventional control theory. And those methods typically are efforts to develop optimal feedback laws or to learn optimal feedback strategies asymptotically as time converges to infinity to learn optimal control strategies. Not from the very beginning, not in the meantime, but as time reaches infinity. In the classical control terminology, we call that the certainty equivalence version of the linear quadratic regulator or of dynamic programming. I know several books in this field. Maybe this is it. The 5 that I know are the ones by Bertsekas, by Frank Lewis and co-authors, by Babushka and co-authors, by Dixon and co-authors, and by Jiang and co-authors. And I'd love to learn if there are more and to study them. Let me now switch to adaptive control, to which I dedicate my talk. Let me give you a brief, very coarse and unfair, of course, in its brevity, history of the 60 years of adaptive control. Roughly the first 2 decades were spent on figuring out for linear systems the questions of control design, the proofs of stability, and the resolutions of the robustness challenges. And the ultimate summary of those results of the first 30 years is this book by Ioannou and Son. For roughly, I'm really simplifying things, for roughly systems that are linear in X and linear also in the parameters theta. This book appeared in 1996, and roughly speaking, you will learn their methods like model reference adaptive control, pole placement, also adaptive LQR, and other methods. The next 10 years were spent, actually no, the next 10 years, the 1980s were spent figuring out how to do adaptive control for nonlinear systems. And the following 5 years, roughly the first half of the 1990s, was spent mastering adaptive control of nonlinear systems. That area was launched with this book. And you see that the difference here is that while the system remains linear in the parameter, it is no longer linear in the state variable X. This book remains incredibly popular to this day with 11,000 citations. There's only one more highly cited research monograph in the control field, and that is Steve Boyd's LMI book. The methods you get to learn from this book are methods related to backstepping. And then after this book, focus was placed on developing neural network versions of those methods, namely studying problems where the nonlinearities are not necessarily so simply linearly parameterized, but are more unstructured. And then the last 15 years, I would say, as far as my perspective is concerned, have been spent on developing adaptive control methods for PDs. Roughly 5 years spent on doing it for parabolic, 5 for hyperbolic, and 5 for delay systems. And those efforts are summarized in these 3 volumes. This one for parabolic PDEs in 2010. More recently, for hyperbolic in this book by Anfinsen and Omo. And this one just last year for delay systems. Delay systems, by the way, are a hybrid class of infinite dimensional systems that includes transport, hyperbolic PDEs, and ordinary differential equations. There are many, many lessons that the adaptive control people have learned the hard way over definitely the first 30 years and continue to struggle with over the subsequent 30 years. And I will emphasize 3 of them. Some of them are extremely basic, but still even from those, there is something to learn. First, the question of stability. What is stability, really? Is it just boundedness? Well, it's more than boundedness. It is exactly what I say here. This is sort of a generic result on stability of closed-loop adaptive control systems. Results stronger than this are possible, but this is what just about every method can achieve. So what you see here is that is a result in which the norm of the state and the parameter estimation error are bounded, but they're not bounded by some unknown constant. They're bounded by a quantity that is continuously dependent by the same quantity at time equal to 0. Monotonically increasing in that quantity, 0 at 0 when that quantity, when that initial quantity is 0. And now, most importantly, what I emphasize here is this exponential growth. Sure, you can have a linear relationship between the norm on the left and its initial condition for some special classes of plants and for some special classes of methods. It may happen. But in general, there is this exponential growth. And this exponential growth is what I would refer to as the price of learning. At some initial period of time, you're controlling an unstable system with poor parameter estimates. You have a large growth, large overshoot, and that's how that overshoot manifests itself by this exponential dependency on the initial condition. So that's what people mean by stability. That's the first half of what's meant when we claim in this field that we've proven stability. The other thing that we mean by that claim is that we've established that the state of the plant is regulated to its set point. For example, the set point may be 0, or it may be a non-zero constant, or it may be a trajectory that we track. Note that there is no claim regarding the convergence of the parameter estimate theta hat. So what is specifically not claimed in these stability studies in general is that the parameter estimate converges to the true values of the plant parameter. Typically, generally not claimed and typically not achieved. It is achieved under some strong, hard to a priori verify assumptions, and typically verified in circumstances that tend to be unfortunate. The other thing that's well known, by the way. Another thing that is a little less well known is the following, that while in the previous slide, I showed that we do prove that the plant state converges to 0, and we are used to seeing that the convergence of the plant state to 0 in linear systems is exponential. In adaptive systems, it is not exponential. Almost never. In fact, it takes very, very special efforts. And it's only very recently that methods have been invented that can do this, and they're known only by very few. So this is almost never achieved, an exponential rate of conversions to zero. Slower rates, and only proves that the plant state belongs to the function space L2 is what is common in adaptive control. Why am I saying all of this? Well, if you're pursuing rigorous studies of combined online control and learning using methods outside of these conventional methods, I recommend you don't attempt to achieve properties listed on this slide, but properties on the previous slide. I definitely hope you do guarantee to your user. The next set of questions is transient performance. This has been an enormous headache to the field of adaptive control. It's been a point of despair. The first point of despair was robustness, and I'm not talking about it because it's been resolved, and robustness can be established for any adaptive control method. Guaranteeing transient performance, namely ensuring that during the learning process, when you have a bad initial estimate of the plant parameter or of the controller, of the initial control gains, that during that learning process, the plant state is not going to have enormous excursions, but that it will be held within some desirable bounds using design coefficients that the control method has at its disposal. Has been possible to achieve only with a small fraction of methods. You cannot achieve this with model reference adaptive control. You cannot achieve it with pole placement and so on. It's become achievable by the use essentially of nonlinear augmentations of the baseline controllers. And the first such results are in papers that precede this book that I mentioned earlier. So the transient guarantees come in the form of L2 and NL infinity bounds. Certainly equivalence controllers, namely just adaptive copies of classical non-adaptive controllers, cannot guarantee desirable adaptive transient performance. And since adaptive dynamic programming or reinforcement learning is a certain equivalence version of LQR, there is no possibility of having such guarantees with those methods. Be prepared for a user to demand it, but that you will not be able to furnish. Finally, optimality. So why is this relevant? Well, because adaptive dynamic programming is an asymptotically optimal learning approach. It is called adaptive dynamic programming. It is an adaptive form of optimal control. Sometimes when terminology includes two adjectives, people commute them. Adaptive optimal control, optimal adaptive control, who cares, right? Well, actually, there's a big difference. The first phrase means that it's an optimal method that is made adaptive, and it's optimal asymptotically as time goes to infinity. Optimal adaptive control is an adaptive control method that is optimal over the entire time horizon. It is truly optimal from 0 to time infinity. Does such a method exist, since adaptive dynamic programming certainly is not that? Can that be achieved? Can the second thing, optimal adaptive control, be achieved? Let's explore that. Let's explore it in the simplest case, because if we can't do it for the scalar plant, there's no point pursuing it in greater generality. So let's consider a scalar plant with a scalar, scalar linear plant with a single parameter. So for that plant, the optimal gain is the one given in blue, which is the solution to a Riccati equation. And here is an update law with a normalization based on the Lyapunov design with a log Lyapunov function for the theta tilde. So this is an adaptive version of an optimal control law. Now here's a result that takes a little bit of proving. That control law happens to be the minimizer of this cost functional. Take a look at it. It's a bit unusual in two ways. First, it's a bit unusual in that the sum of the squares of the plant state and of the input are divided by this Riccati solution, which is fine because this quantity is positive. It's not constant, but it is positive. The second thing that is far more unusual is that there is an exponential, there's a weight that is exponential in the parameter error. So this is just what the input happens to minimize. This is a control law that is inversely optimal. It is optimal for all time, but it happens to be optimal. This form of optimality was not demanded by the user. It just happens to hold. Well, I will agree with you if you say that you want to be able to achieve optimality with respect to the cost function that you assign, that you pick first. So is that possible? Is a direct optimal control, or rather inverse optimal control possible? As of yet, it does not exist. And perhaps it should not even be sought. Because even in this simple scalar case, how would you, here, I'm giving you here the value function. How would you define in an adaptive dynamic programming method that the value function should be of a form like this, that incorporates a dependency on the parameter, on the parameter estimation error, including the unknown parameter, so that that unknown parameter doesn't show up in the control law. So there is certainly a problem, and maybe even a curse, not of optimality and not of dimensionality, but of optimality, something that simply does not appear in optimal control problems as conceived by Kalman, but in the adaptive versions of that. Next, I want to show you a couple of applications of adaptive control in infinite dimension. First, adaptive control in infinite dimension caused by the presence of a large delay in a nonlinear system, which will happen to be a robotic manipulator. And second, an adaptive control in infinite dimension for a system modeled by a PD, which will be a traffic system. So first, a robotic manipulator. This is the Baxter robot, 7 degrees of freedom. I will be showing you two movies. In the middle is going to be a movie of a successful performance of an adaptively controlled Baxter robot that performs a movement of an invisible object from here to a place here. In the upper right corner, I will show you a movie of a robot that is subject to a large, significant enough delay that this robot fails. This delay is introduced to simulate Parkinson's disease. The upper right robot would act exactly as a human who is inflicted with Parkinson's disease, namely who has a delay in the in the neuromuscular feedback loop would act. So here's the movie. A lot is going on. 2 movies running in parallel, plus there is going to be a plot of the delay estimate. So the robot in the middle will be governed by a feedback law that does 2 things. It estimates the delay and it compensates the delay. The basic controller is not just a nonlinear controller, but a nonlinear robotic controller endowed with a predictor feedback, a special kind of feedback that compensates a delay. So first, please concentrate on the upper right corner how this poor Baxter struggles with a shaking due to the delay. Second, let's concentrate on how my PowerPoint is unresponsive. I apologize. Let's concentrate on the plot in the lower right corner. So you see the smooth motion of the robot, which employs the delay estimate, which converges to not exactly the true value of the delay, but close enough. All right, let me know, in the interest of time, move on to the next application. This next application is the suppression of the stop-and-go instability in road traffic. So you've all driven in traffic at around 25 miles per hour. For those who are from Europe, that's your second gear traffic. It's the most frustrating thing. You keep shifting between first and second gear, never fully stopped, but always on the verge of stopping. And when it's congested, you can't help it, but it would be preferable to travel slow but steady. And this is possible. This is possible. And I'm not talking about connected autonomous vehicles. I'm talking about making this possible by using the interaction between cars. There is the behavioral interhuman interaction, or how humans react to the acceleration and the deceleration of the cars ahead of them. All of this chain of interactions can be influenced by a single traffic light, which can influence a single ramp metering that is letting cars at a desired rate on the road and influencing the upstream traffic. The model of such traffic, there are various models, but the most elegant models, the cleanest models, are PD models. The most basic model is a single PD, which is not detailed enough for stop and go. It's a PD modeling just the traffic density, and it can model congestion and shocks. But to get an instability and stop and go, you need a second PD for the traffic speed. Too complicated to get into the details. 2 coupled first order nonlinear hyperbolic PDs. It takes considerable training and study and innovation to design a controller for such a system of coupled PDs. We're not talking a week. We're talking in round numbers a year. And the result of such a design, using only output feedback, namely using only the measurement of the density at the location of the ramp, is this kind of a feedback law with gains that are given at the bottom of the slide. The most important thing methodologically is not the many lines of expression on the previous slide. But this single line here, this is the result of the backstepping design. This integral equation for computing the control gain K2 hat adaptively in real time, based on the estimation in real time of the planned parameter theta2 hat. So theta2 hat is being estimated, being learned in real time, and K2 hat is being calculated. So K2 hat is, if you want to think in terms of optimal control, this is like the Riccati equation counterpart in the backstepping method. So here are the results. Without control, starting from some initial condition, the traffic will settle into stop and go oscillations given here, and it'll be unpleasant. With control, the traffic will be settled into congested but steady traffic. I'm showing you a traffic segment that is not long, it's just 1 kilometer. And it will take 9 minutes to settle. What takes place in those 9 minutes? 3 things take place. This is adaptive output feedback. 2 things need to simultaneously be estimated: the unmeasured density and velocity state and the unknown parameters of this PD. Plus, the control needs to be propagated all the way upstream from the ramp. So that's why it takes about 9 minutes. For the cars to get from the to drive at that speed, the 1 kilometer takes about 2 minutes. So that's just to get an idea of how long it takes. Not long at all. It's pretty quick. The learning part of all of this. So what do the update laws do? The update laws are given by these differential equations. You see the partial derivative in time, but these are not PDs because there are no partial derivatives in space. These are infinite dimensional ODEs. They're indexed by the spatial variable X. The estimation error, this is again, what takes considerable training to master. And I will not dwell on this, but I will show you the truth about adaptive control. I've said from the beginning, don't expect the parameter estimate to converge to the true value. The parameter estimate will converge to a value that is just good enough for the control to suppress the stop and go. So the true values of these distributed parameters, theta1 and theta2, are shown in green. The parameter estimate converges to something that looks totally unrelated to it. And in 9 minutes, the stop and go has been suppressed, and there's no longer a reason, nor even an error to drive these parameter estimates further. If there is some disruption to traffic, then there will be further learning, and we'll go to closer to the unknown parameter. Let's now take a look at reinforcement learning applied to the same problem. And this may be the most interesting part of my talk to the present audience. So to summarize on the left, I've shown you the development of a backstepping method for the ARZ-PD model of traffic. What I will show you next is the development of a reinforcement learning effort for the same PD model. It will be a simulation-based training with a reward function that is essentially the norm of the deviation of the density and the velocity states relative to their equilibrium values. So here's how this goes. On the horizontal axis, I have time. So these are the experiments. on the vertical axis, I have this reward. The rewards converging to 0 means success. Let's start from k equal to 1, experiment 1. You see that the rewards, hasn't converged to 0. So the first trial obviously is not a great success. By the trial 100, things have interestingly gotten worse, and that probably doesn't surprise you. It's just not enough training to really master such a high-dimensional system. But by test 200, we've started to approach the performance of the backstepping design, which is shown in blue. And by the step 800, we have gotten close enough. Now, let me remind you, this is not real-time learning like what I showed you with adaptive backstepping. This is offline simulation-based learning. And one has to wonder, is simulation-based learning truly model-free? Because the model has been used for learning. The thing that worries me the most is that, or that disappoints me the most, is that I can't do this learning in real traffic. I have to do it on the ARZPD model, because in real traffic there would be a massacre on the road. How long would it take? Well, at this rate, 800 experiments, it would take a couple of weeks, day and night, to learn the backstepping feedback law. And finally, the controller will work well starting only from near the initial conditions used for training. If it doesn't, the controllers have worked poorly starting from initial conditions out, reasonably far from the training set. Still, I want really to give credit to reinforcement learning here. I think that it's remarkable that a user with zero background in PDs, a user who hasn't even heard of a Sobolev space or an H1 norm or the Agmon inequality, can do this and recover the backstepping controller after enough simulations. On the other hand, I do know that the conditions of this road will change, and that this controller will sooner or later be unsatisfactory because it doesn't have an online learning capability. Let me now switch to something completely different from what we call adaptive control. It's related, but it's very, very different. It's extremum seeking. So I just spoke about reinforcement learning, which is reward driven. Extremum seeking can be thought of as a method that could be called online reward seeking, which is black box, completely black box based. Online reward seeking. So what is extremum seeking? We're a year away from its centennial. It's something very old, invented before, decades before the transistor. So it's a method of model-free real-time optimization. We're trying to find the maximizer of an unknown function. Just the maximizer, not to learn the function. And how do you find it? This invention from France by a railroad engineer of all things involves an integrator, all the technologies that you could do with vacuum tubes at that time, an integrator, a summing junction and a multiplier, and a sinusoidal generator for a perturbation. So this is the mutation needed for the exploration, while the exploitation is being done with the integrator. The important thing here is that this Qt invention happens to generate the approximation of the derivative of the unknown function at the value of theta. This is in fact an approximate gradient scheme. Let me now show you an example. Let me show you why this is a fascinating method. And let me show it to you by what I consider to be the most fascinating and the most natural application of this method. So here is the block diagram that I showed you, and I want to emphasize the following part in this block diagram: the sinusoid. So the person 100 years ago used the periodic perturbation to do his seeking of the maximum. Let's now turn our attention to the problem of prey seeking by a fish. The fish uses sinusoidal undulations of its body or its tail for propulsion. That's its means of locomotion in any direction. The fish is an animal, needs to eat, needs to seek a prey or some other food, has no GPS, gets hungry at night, sees nothing. How does it find its prey in such conditions? So here's a conjecture based on extremum seeking. So I will apply the algorithm from the diagram, and let's see how it does. I'm starting with the fish oriented away from the prey, and the fish doesn't know which way the prey is. It simply will be guided with that algorithm connecting its single nostril to its tail. Oh, by the way, just to stop this, in the upper left corner, I'm showing the signal field. I'm showing the olfactory field. The scent is strong at the location of the prey and decays away. In the big area in green, I'm showing the mechanical field. These are the forces acting on the field, in particular, on the fish, in particular, vorticity. All right, let me continue. So anyway, you see that the extremum seeking reorients the fish, and then after that, it's kind of done. I mean, it simply doesn't let the fish stray away. All right, so extremum seeking was invented in 22 and went dormant in late 60s for some reasons. Somebody showed it to me in the late 90s, and I was completely blown away by how much simpler it was than the methods I was showing you in that 1995 book on adaptive nonlinear control, how robust and effective it was, and how mysterious to me its stability was. And I just could not rest until I understood why it worked. And finally, I managed to reach the understanding, and this result was published in 2000. I didn't expect the torrent of activities that followed. More theory, numerous applications, impossible to keep up. Over 1,000 papers per year. Fortunately, I'm not being asked to review each of those papers, and I'm aware of a fraction of what's being produced. The first book on this was this 2003 book, which introduces the basics of periodic or sinusoidal based extremum seeking. And about 10 years ago, motivated by E. coli chemotaxis, we developed a stochastic version of extremum seeking with Shujin Liu, and this book contains that. How does extreme seeking relate to machine learning? Well, if you think, if one of your perspectives on machine learning is that it's about learning functions, extreme seeking doesn't do that. It doesn't learn functions. It just learns the maximizers of functions that have extrema. Let me illustrate that next. On non-cooperative games using Nash equilibrium seeking. So here is a non-cooperative game, a duopoly with two players, formulated as not a periodic, but a stochastic extreme seeking game. So you see the white noise being employed instead of sinusoids. This is work that was developed first deterministically with Paul Friedhoff, and then stochastically with Shujun Liu, and in both collaborations with Tamer Bashar. The algorithms that both agents employ are completely model-free. They're exactly the same as the first algorithm I showed you. They're not even aware that they are engaged in a game. They simply use an algorithm. They simply use an integrator, addition, multiplication, and a perturbation signal, be it a sinusoid or white noise. So completely model-free. But the optimization problem is a non-cooperative game. There is a mutual influence. However, these players are not trying to learn it. They're not even aware that they're solving a game. They're not trying to learn the payoff functions, not even their own, let alone the opponents. All they're trying to essentially learn are their Nash equilibria, their optimal strategies. And what we can prove is the following. We had to develop a new form of stochastic averaging in order to be able to establish results like this. So we can establish exponential or weak exponential stability results of those Nash equilibria with probability 1. Modulo some residual value, which depends on the intensity of the injected noise. So bottom line, extreme seeking magically finds the Nash equilibrium of a game in a completely model-free fashion. Let me now show you, for the remainder of my talk, 3 extreme seeking applications. So the first application is in semiconductor manufacturing, in photolithography, which is maybe the key part of semiconductor manufacturing, the technology of the extreme ultraviolet light. So you've all heard about Moore's law, the doubling of the density every maybe 18 months and so on, but that ended 10 years ago because the laser just could not keep up producing the same power at smaller and smaller wavelengths. So then a really wild, aka ingenious idea came, coming from actually inertial fusion as a motivating domain. The idea was to evaporate a liquid metal, tin in particular, which has a low melting temperature, and have the recondensation of that metal emit light whose wavelength is an order of magnitude smaller than that of lasers, but the power is high enough for photolithography. That's the idea. So I will now show you the control part of all of this, which is the result of a student of mine, Paul Freehoff, together with a company that was back then called Cymer and now is a part of ASML. So here is what this technology looks like. Diagram, simplification. So the components are a generator of these droplets of liquid tin, mirror, lens, and a beam of light that gets emitted. So here's how it works. This droplet generator produces a rapid fire of tin droplets at 50,000, by now maybe already 80,000 droplets per second. Remember, you can't hear above 20 kilohertz. So this is such a rapid fire that that's even inaudible. That's how fast it is. So these droplets travel, and each droplet is being targeted by a pulse by a laser pulse, and it needs to hit it. Once it blasts it, light gets emitted. So you have two rapid fires that you need to hit bullseyes 50,000 times per second. Now look at the light wavelengths. The laser wavelength is 250 nanometers. The wavelength of the extreme ultraviolet light is 40 nanometers. So a factor of more than 10. So this transformer of wavelength results in density increase of 200 times. Where is extreme seeking in all of this? They couldn't get this to work without applying extreme seeking to tune the positions of the mirror and the lens. With all other methods, it would work in the morning, it would no longer work by lunchtime. And they realized that it's not about using better cameras, it's not about modeling the fluid dynamics of droplets, it's simply about maximizing the light intensity. So extreme seeking solved the problem. So this was in 2013, and at that moment, all of the major companies, IBM, Intel, Samsung, TSMC, have this technology, billions and billions of dollars in savings and in profit for the companies. And just a month ago, IBM announced that they've gotten to 2 nanometer chips. So that's a density increase relative to what used to be the case 10, 12 years ago, or I don't know, on the order of 10 to the 4th. Remember, the point is that this process constantly changes. Learning can never stop. It cannot be done just once. Not dissimilar to this is the application done roughly the same time when NASA's ChemCam camera on the Mars rover, when its algorithm for autofocus wasn't working. This is a camera that performs the testing of the chemical composition of rocks on Mars. And once they uploaded the extreme seeking algorithm, which my student Walter Barkley facilitated, this instrument worked vastly better, and an indication was found of the presence of water on Mars. Finally, maybe the most exciting to me currently application is the following. I'm going to get us back to the first application I showed you with fish. But instead of a fish, we're going to look at sperm, a single sperm cell seeking an egg, or at least swimming in a field of a chemoattractant like emitted by sperm. So this is related to extremum seeking in the sense that a few years ago, an algorithm was published by four of us here, which is quite unusual and exploits the presence of trigonometric nonlinearities in the unicycle model so that the periodicity is not injected, but simply by using a bias in the angular velocity omega and feeding as feedback the rate of the measured concentration, you perform extremum seeking by generating trajectories that are circles that drift towards the source. A student at UC Irvine who was familiar with that paper also saw work in biology on sperm and was fascinated by the connection. And then he rolled up his sleeves and took all of this from a study of a unicycle to a study of the mechanics of a flagellum swimming in a low Reynolds number fluid, and theoretically confirmed that it is this algorithm that is most plausibly used by sperm. Let me show you what sperm does. So this is exactly what the unicycle does as well when applied in the paper that I mentioned earlier. So that is the sperm's seeking of the concentration of the chemoattractant, and this experimented movie is the result of the work of Adan Guerrero from UNAM in Mexico. So I'm at the end of my talk, and I want to wrap it up with three very brief messages. You saw that a lot of what I did was for continuous time systems, PDs, and so on. So don't convert everything to discrete time and finite dimension. Try to, if possible, operate in the native domain of systems, especially if it's physics that where the systems reside. Second, don't limit yourself to solving systems by optimality. There are many other ways that get you to the result more easily and just as well. And finally, when it comes to learning, this is maybe the most important thing. It's something that not only may have to be redone, but typically will have to be done over and over in a realistic system. So thank you. I'm happy to take the questions, but before I do, and as these are read, let me just mention that if there is any interest in hearing a bit more on some of these, I've given a retrospective of a lot of stuff with morsels of things, with staying totally on the surface without getting into any detail. One of these things will happen to be the subject of a lecture in 2 days, 4 p.m. Central Time. What is that? I think that's 8 a.m. 8 a.m. on Friday. If you're interested in learning specifically about adaptive control for systems with large and completely unknown delays, namely a review of the contents of this new book, and you want to join, you can get the link by contacting Professor Gabor Oros at University of Michigan. Or you can just send me an email and I'll send you the link. So thank you very much, and happy to take the questions.
Yeah, hey, Professor, thanks again for the wonderful talk. I will start from a question, I guess, on behalf of many learning people. I guess for learning theorists, one of the biggest questions in adaptive system is a trade-off between exploration and exploitation. I'm very curious, and I'm wondering what is your perspective on this? from an adaptive control theorist point of view? The trade-off between exploration and exploitation.
Mm-hmm. So I spoke about two things. One is the conventional adaptive control, model-based adaptive control, and the other is extremum seeking. In extremum seeking, there is clearly exploration, because you saw those sinusoids. They are, evolutionary speaking, my mutations, or you saw the white noise employed in the non-cooperative games. They are the explorations. The bigger they are, the broader one explores. There's a price for broad explorations and so on. And the exploitation is the seeking. The gradient leads the fish or the sperm or the photolithography instrument to the optimal point. So that is obvious. The presence of those notions is obvious in extremum seeking. In classical adaptive control, one has to think a bit. Is there exploration? Since there is definitely exploitation, it's all about, I mean, clearly it's about exploitation of learning, but is there exploration? Well, you know, if the system is unstable, it forces you to explore. It just explores for you. And if you're lucky for the system or if either the system is stable or the initial condition happens to be stabilizing, then there's going to be little exploration and it'll be all exploitation.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thanks. Second question from Ram is regarding the transient issue you mentioned. He's wondering what about the use of multiple model methodology to mitigate this transient performance issue? The multiple model methodology.
Multiple models.
Yeah.
Give me just a second. That definitely has been explored. And there has been success. I've not worked on this. You will find multiple model adaptive control. The first name that comes to mind is Professor Narendra from Yale. I wish I could give you a comprehensive list of people who have worked on that. The advantage of using multiple models must exist. I'm not sure that I can articulate it on the spot, because there always could be a disadvantage that goes along. I'm not being, philosophical yin and yang, but the moment we have more knobs, we can do also damage just as we can gain benefit.
Thanks. A third question from Shuo is, could you comment on whether there's any drawback of not learning the true model in adaptive control? Because you mentioned that it's in general impossible and not necessarily to fully cover the true model. So what is a drawback of that?
The question is there a drawback of not learning the
true model? In adaptive control, like theta, we don't need to cover the ground truth of theta. We just need to make sure theta is good enough, right, in adaptive control. So I guess his question is there any drawback of not perfectly covering the true parameter?
In classical adaptive control, you don't even know when you have learned the true model. You just don't know. You may have learned it, and yet you don't know. And a disturbance might come, and you may go from the true model to from the true parameter to another parameter that is good enough and adequate for it. So I don't know that there's a clear-cut answer to to this question. You know, there are interesting advances on the subject of learning the true parameters without the price of persistency of excitation. There are two directions. One that is being pursued through multiple papers by Romeo Ortega and colleagues is relies on the fact that there is enough excitation during transients that gives plenty of opportunity to discern what the true parameters are. And I'm mentioning Ortega because of recent papers, but this goes back to Martin Gay and his students maybe a decade earlier. There's also work by Iason Karafillis with me as a co-author, but really the ideas are Iason's, of employing batch learning. Batch learning is a form of learning. It's in batches. It's not continuous. So it means that you apply restraint. You don't immediately exploit the new information, but you accumulate information and then change the parameter after a while. When? Typically after some sufficient change has occurred in the state of the plant, typically when the things have gotten worse and there's a necessity to modify your belief in the parameter. The relevance of that approach for learning is, and I will be honest, I'm extremely impressed with this work, and I can say candidly, without being self-serving, because I already said that it's Karafillis' idea. What's fascinating about this approach to learning is that you can prove that the learning is completed in a number of steps, in a number of batch adjustments of the parameter vector that is equal to the dimension of the parameter vector. So if you have 17 components, 17 adjustments, and that's it. So the learning will be completed in finite time. Moreover, it's also proved that the parameter estimate will converge to the true value from all initial conditions except for a set of measure 0. So this is consistent with all of the other theory of adaptive control, that without persistency of excitation, you don't expect to get perfect convergence. But it gets so much closer to the ideal, to the impossible ideal of getting perfect convergence without persistency of excitation. For all initial conditions, but a measure 0 in finite time, you get convergence of the you get the perfect parameters, and from that point on, you have a non-adaptive controller that gives you non-adaptive performance, including exponential regulation.
Okay, cool. So in the interest of time, we will not be able to take more questions. So let's thank Professor Krstic again for this wonderful talk and a very insightful Q&A session. So as we mentioned, we will have a brief summer break of the seminar series for the next couple of weeks. And so stay tuned, and we will update the upcoming talks on the website and via emails. So thanks all, and have a nice summer break, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today.
Thanks. Thanks, Professor.